At 7:32 a.m., February 10, 1942, Lieutenant Commander John Thach saw 6 Japanese Zeros diving from the sun toward his 4 Wildcats over Wake Island. He knew his men had perhaps 90 seconds to live. He was 37, with 214 hours in the cockpit of a Wildcat, and not a single enemy kill to his name. The enemy had dispatched 18 Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters to clear the skies of American patrols. His Wildcat was slower. The Zero climbed quicker, turned sharper, and could outfly any American fighter at any height. This was a fact known to both sides. The calculus was merciless. A Zero could complete a combat turn 14 seconds faster than a Wildcat. 14 seconds to slip onto your tail, 14 to aim, 14 to fire the killing burst. By February, the Pacific Fleet had lost 43 Wildcats in single combat with Zeros, 43 aviators who had tried to turn with them, 43 graves. The outcome was always the same. An American pilot spots a Zero, he turns to fight, the Zero outmaneuvers him, the Zero shoots him down. Command repeated the same directives: avoid turning battles, disengage if you can. But to run was to abandon your comrades. It meant watching Zeros machine gun your wingmen as you fled. Thach led Fighting Squadron 3. 4 pilots, 4 Wildcats, 4 men are relying on him for their survival. Yet he had no solution for the Zero's turn radius, no answer for its rate of climb, nothing but the sight of good men dying. 3 days earlier, in his quarters at Naval Air Station San Diego, Thach had stared at a packet of matches. His wife had mailed them in a letter, 20 wooden matches in a slim cardboard box. He had been wrestling with the problem of the Zero for weeks. How do you defeat an enemy who can always outturn you? How do you live when your opponent is nimbler, flown by veterans with 2 years of war experience? Thach picked up 2 matches, holding them side by side. He began to move them in contrary motion, weaving them past one another. The matches crossed, then crossed again, never far apart, always covering each other. And in that moment, an idea sparked. What if 2 Wildcats did not fight as individuals? What if they flew as a single unit, weaving in a continuous pattern? If a Zero latched onto one Wildcat's tail, that pilot would turn toward his partner. His partner would turn toward him. They would pass, and the Zero pursuing the first would fly straight into the second Wildcat's line of fire. It was madness. It broke every rule in the Navy's fighter manual. Fighters engaged alone, pairs stayed together for travel, but when the fight began, you split and battled one-on-one. That was how air combat worked. That was how every pilot had been taught since the last war. But Thach could not unsee those 2 matches, weaving together. He could not forget the 43 dead pilots. He had summoned his wingman, Lieutenant Edward O'Hare, that very night. He showed him the matches. He laid out the weave. O'Hare studied the simple wooden sticks for half a minute. Then he looked at Thach and asked a single question. When do we test it? 4 days later, Thach was about to learn if his matchstick idea would save lives or lead 4 pilots to their deaths. The 6 Japanese Zeros were now 200 yards out and accelerating. His hand went to his radio. It was time to attempt something never before done in combat. Time to learn if 2 matches could defeat 6 Zeros. Thach's voice cut through the static. Weave on my mark. His wingman, Lieutenant Junior Grade Edward Bassett, was 800 feet to his right. Further out, another 1,000 feet flew the Wildcats of Ensigns Daniel Sheedy and Edgar Colson. 4 American fighters in a loose line. 6 enemies diving from 11,000 feet. Standard procedure said to scatter, to turn, and fight alone. But Thach keyed his mic and gave an order never before uttered in U.S. Navy combat. Bassett, on me, weave pattern, execute. Bassett turned his Wildcat toward Thach. Thach turned toward Bassett. They flew head-on. The Zeros dropped to 8,000 feet. The Japanese pilots likely thought the Americans were in a panic, that 2 Wildcats were on a collision course. But Bassett and Thach did not collide. At 400 yards, both pilots wrenched their planes into hard banks. Thach went left, Bassett went right. They crossed paths with barely 200 feet between them. Then they continued turning, arcing around to cross once more, a figure-8 pattern. 2 aircraft weaving back and forth just like the matches on Thach's desk. The lead Zero pilot selected Bassett, committed to the chase, and close to 600 yards. Standard Zero tactic: get in close, use superior agility, and smash the target with 20mm cannon fire. The Zero pilot expected Bassett to try and outturn him. He expected a simple kill. But Bassett did not turn away from the Zero. He turned toward Thach. The Zero followed, lining up his guns. 500 yards, 400 yards. The Zero pilot had Bassett centered in his sights, 3 seconds from firing, and then Thach's Wildcat roared through the weave from the opposite direction. Suddenly, the Zero pilot had a new urgent problem. He was chasing Bassett, but Bassett was flying directly toward another Wildcat, and that Wildcat's guns were aimed right at him. Thach fired from 300 yards, 6.5 caliber machine guns, 70 rounds per second. The Zero pilot had one option: break off or be shredded. He broke, pulling hard to the right and climbing away. The remaining 5 Zeros scattered. For the first time in the Pacific War, Zeros were running from Wildcats. Sheedy and Coulson had seen the weave work. Now they tried it themselves. Sheedy turned toward Coulson, Coulson turned toward Sheedy. 2 more Wildcats weaving. Another Zero locked onto Coulson's tail, close to 400 yards. Then Sheedy came through the weave, and the Zero pilot flinched, pulled up, and broke away. The entire engagement lasted 6 minutes. 6 Japanese Zeros against 4 American Wildcats. The expected result should have been 4 American losses, but when the Zeros finally climbed away to the northwest, all 4 Wildcats were still airborne. Thach checked his fuel, then his wingmen. No hits, no casualties. The weave had worked. Thach landed at Ford Island 40 minutes later. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the adrenaline, from the dawning realization that perhaps, just perhaps, American pilots did not have to die every time they encountered Zeros. But Fighter Command was not convinced. Thach filed his combat report that afternoon. He detailed the weave, explained its mechanics, and recommended its immediate adoption by all squadrons. The reply arrived 3 days later. Interesting tactic, requires further evaluation, not approved for widespread use. Thach stared at the response for a long time. 43 pilots were lost in February, and the command wanted more tests. And all the while, the Japanese were preparing something larger, something that would test the weave against odds no fighter pilot had ever confronted. For 68 days, Thach would be flying over an island called Midway, facing 50 Zeros with just 8 Wildcats. In the months between February and June to 1942, Thach drilled Fighting Squadron 3 in the weave every single day. Morning sorties, afternoon runs, night formations when the moon was bright. His pilots practiced the pattern until they could perform it in their sleep. Turn toward your wingman, cross, turn back, cross again. Simple in theory, harrowing in practice at 300 miles per hour with Zeros on your tail. The Navy had still not officially sanctioned the tactic, but Thach did not wait for permission. He taught it to any pilot who would listen. He showed him the matches, sketched diagrams on blackboards, and explained the geometry. If a Zero takes your tail, you turn into your wingman. The Zero must then choose: follow you into your wingman's guns or break off. Either way, you live. Some pilots grasped it instantly. Others believed Thach was unhinged. One squadron commander told him the weave defied the fundamentals of air combat. You cannot fly toward another plane in a fight. You will crash, you will freeze, you will get everyone killed. But Thach kept teaching because pilots kept dying. By May, the Pacific Fleet had lost 91 Wildcats to Zeros, 91 funerals, 91 letters home, and Fighter Command still issued the same directives: avoid engagement when possible, run if outnumbered. The directives might as well have read, surrender and die.
Then, naval intelligence intercepted Japanese communications. Code breakers at Station Hypo in Pearl Harbor deciphered the signals. The Japanese were organizing a massive offensive against a target, Midway Island. A force of 4 aircraft carriers and 270 planes, it was the most powerful carrier operation the Imperial Japanese Navy had ever assembled. Their target, June 4th, 1942. Admiral Chester Nimitz summoned every available flat top to Pearl Harbor. He had 3, the Yorktown, the Enterprise, and the Hornet. The Japanese held 4, backed by 2 years of victorious combat and Zeros that could outperform any fighter America sent against them. The numbers were a recipe for disaster. The American carriers were outnumbered. The American pilots were outclassed. And Midway's airstrip was a target that Japanese bombers would pulverize within the first half hour. Fighting Squadron 3 received its deployment orders on May 26th. Report to the USS Yorktown. Prepare for carrier operations. Thach read the orders and knew their meaning. His squadron would be flying combat air patrol over the Yorktown when the Japanese arrived, defending the carrier from bombers, engaging Zeros, and likely dying. He assembled his pilots that evening. 7 men. 7 Wildcats, 7 lives resting on a matchbook tactic the Navy still refused to officially sanction. Thach showed them the matches one final time, explaining the weave once more. Then, he gave them the hard truth. The Japanese are bringing 50 Zeros to Midway, perhaps more. We will have 8 Wildcats, maybe fewer if the Enterprise or Hornet loses planes before the main event. Our only chance to live is the weave. Our only chance to protect the Yorktown is the weave. Our only chance to win is the weave. One pilot voiced the question on all their minds. What if it fails? What if we weave and the Zeros shoot us down regardless? Thach had no perfect answer. He simply showed them the matches again, demonstrating how 2 sticks, weaving together, could cover one another, could protect each other, could survive as one when survival alone was impossible. The Yorktown departed Pearl Harbor on May 30th, 4 days to Midway, 4 days to prepare for a battle that would decide the fate of the Pacific, 4 days to hope a matchstick idea would hold when 50 Zeros fell from the sky. For on June 4th, at 0930 hours, Thach would gaze upward and behold a sight no American pilot had ever witnessed, a sky turned black with enemy fighters. June 4th, 1942, 0930 hours. The Yorktown was holding at 14,000 feet above the Yorktown when the first Japanese strike wave appeared. 18 Aichi dive bombers shielded by 12 Zeros. Not 50, not the vast armada intelligence had warned of, but 12 Zeros still meant 3-to-1 odds against Thach's 4-plane section. The Zeros held the high ground at 15,000 feet. Standard Japanese doctrine: seize the altitude advantage, dive onto the American fighters, use speed and agility to control the fight. Thach counted the hostiles. He counted his own. 4 Wildcats, 12 Zeros. His hand moved to the radio. Weave pattern. Execute on my mark. His wingman, Lieutenant Junior Grade Edward Bassett, was 600 feet to his right. 2 more Wildcats trailed behind. The Zeros dove. Thach watched them commit, saw them select their targets. 3 Zeros angled toward Thach, 4 targeted Bassett. The rest pressed on toward the Yorktown. Thach gave the order. Mark. Execute. He banked hard toward Bassett. Bassett turned toward him. They crossed paths at 12,000 feet. The 3 Zeros chasing Thach suddenly faced a dilemma. Their target was flying head-on toward another Wildcat, and that Wildcat's guns were trained on them. The lead Zero pilot hesitated for just 2 seconds, but 2 seconds in combat covers 400 yards. Thach came through the weave and opened fire. .50 caliber rounds tore into the engine. The enemy plane rolled left, spewing black smoke, and fell away. Thach's first Zero kill. But the other 2 Zeros did not disengage. They had seen the weave, understood the pattern, and they adapted. Instead of fixating on Thach's tail, they split. One climbed high, the other dove low. They attacked from divergent angles, forcing Thach to choose which threat to confront. Thach pulled into a climbing turn toward the high Zero. Bassett broke toward the low one. For 6 critical seconds, the weave pattern fractured. Both Wildcats were fighting alone, precisely what Thach had sought to prevent. The high Zero got a gun solution on Thach at 800 yards. 20mm cannon fire walked up his left wing. 2 shells punched through the wing root. One passed through his cockpit canopy 3 inches from his head. Thach felt the concussion, felt shards of aluminum pepper his flight suit. He kept turning. Bassett's voice crackled over the radio. I'm hit. Repeat, I'm hit. Thach looked left. Bassett's Wildcat streamed white smoke. A coolant leak. Maybe worse. The low Zero was still on his tail, hammering him with machine gun fire. Thach made a decision. He abandoned his turn, diving toward Bassett. The weave had broken, but its core principle held. Place yourself between your wingman and the threat. He descended on the low Zero from its 7 o'clock high. 600 yards. 5, 4. He fired. The Zero exploded. Fragments of wing and fuselage cartwheeled through the air. Bassett's Wildcat shuddered, losing altitude. He called over the radio, engine is overheating. I'm heading back to Yorktown. Thach told him go. He ordered the other 2 Wildcats to escort him. That left Thach alone at 11,000 feet with 10 Zeros still in the fight. The weave required a partner. Without one, Thach was just another Wildcat pilot trying to cheat death. He turned toward the Yorktown, beginning his descent. 3 Zeros spotted him and moved to intercept. Thach scanned the sky for friendly aircraft. He saw 4 Wildcats from another squadron 3 miles east, too far to assist. The 3 Zeros closed in. Thach had no wingman, no weave, no support, but he had spent 4 months living the weave, 4 months internalizing its geometry. And he realized something. The weave did not strictly require 2 aircraft. It required 2 points in space. He turned hard right, then instantly reversed into a sharp left turn. Abrupt angular maneuvers, not the smooth, predictable arcs the Zeros expected. The lead Zero committed to following Thach's right turn, but Thach was already reversing left. The Zero pilot had to correct, to pull harder, to burn precious energy. Thach did it again. Right turn, left reversal. The Zero followed right, Thach went left. The Japanese pilot was perpetually half a second behind, always correcting, always reacting, and every correction stole his speed, his energy, his altitude advantage. After 40 seconds of violent reversals, the Zero was level with Thach. Same speed, same energy, no advantage. The Zero pilot broke off and climbed away. The other two Zeros followed him. Thach had just proven something vital. The principle of the weave worked even for a single pilot. Sharp reversals, constant, unpredictable direction changes. Never let the enemy anticipate your move. Force them to react. Force them to bleed energy.
He landed on the Yorktown 20 minutes later. Bassett had already arrived. His Wildcat had taken 4 hits, but the engine held long enough to reach the carrier. The other pilots from Fighting Squadron 3 were being debriefed in the ready room. They had all witnessed Thach's solitary fight. They had all watched him survive 3 Zeros alone. Word spread through the fighter squadrons that afternoon. Thach's weave works, even solo, even outnumbered. By evening, pilots from the Enterprise and Hornet were seeking Thach out, asking him to explain the tactic. He showed them the matches, sketched diagrams, and demonstrated the reversals. Some pilots tested it that very night, flying paired sorties over the carrier group, practicing the weave, learning its timing. By June 5th, 18 Wildcat pilots could execute the pattern. By June 6th, 32 pilots knew it. The weave was propagating through the fleet faster than any official doctrine ever had. The Japanese took note. Radio intercepts from June 7th contained mentions of new American tactics, of American fighters flying in coordinated pairs, executing bewildering maneuvers, refusing to be killed. One intercepted message from a Japanese fighter commander stated, "American Wildcat pilots have altered their methods. Expect increased resistance." On June 10th, Fighting Squadron 3 flew a combat air patrol over a convoy near Midway. 8 Wildcats, 14 Zeros attacked. Thach called the weave. All 4 pairs executed perfectly. The Zeros attempted their standard playbook, trying to isolate individual Wildcats to leverage their superior agility. But every time a Zero committed to a Wildcat's tail, that Wildcat turned toward its wingman. Every time the Zeros tried to split a pair, both Wildcats turned into one another. The pattern held. After 12 minutes, the Zeros broke contact. They damaged 2 Wildcats, but scored 0 kills. The Americans had shot down 3 Zeros, 3 confirmed kills. It was the first time in the Pacific War that Wildcats had achieved a positive kill ratio against Zeros in a major engagement. Fighter Command finally paid attention. On June 15th, Commander John Thach received orders to report to Pearl Harbor. He was to report to Admiral Nimitz and prepare a formal briefing on the weave tactic. The Navy had decided to evaluate whether this matchstick idea should become official doctrine. Thach arrived at Pearl Harbor on June 18th. He dedicated 2 days to assembling his briefing. He prepared diagrams, gathered combat footage, collected sworn statements from pilots, compiled kill ratios and survival statistics, every piece of evidence command required to see the weave's undeniable effectiveness. Yet while Thach was preparing his presentation, Japanese intelligence was conducting its own analysis. They had dissected the new American tactics. They had studied the weave and formulated a countermeasure, a method to shatter the pattern and kill both Wildcats at once. On June 21st, Thach would brief Admiral Nimitz. But on June 23rd, Fighting Squadron 3 would meet 18 Zeros over Santa Cruz Island, and those Zeros would be employing tactics designed for a single purpose: to destroy the Thach weave. June 23rd, 1942, 08:15 hours, Santa Cruz Island. Fighting Squadron 3 was providing cover for a convoy when radar registered contacts. 18 bogies inbound from the northwest, 12 miles out. Thach counted his Wildcats, 8 aircraft, 4 pairs, arranged in the standard weave formation. He had briefed Nimitz 3 days prior. Nimitz had authorized field testing of the weave across all Pacific fighter squadrons. Now Thach was about to learn that the Japanese had done their homework too. The Zeros held at 16,000 feet, but they did not dive immediately. They circled, waiting. Thach watched them orbit for a full 90 seconds. It was strange, uncharacteristic behavior. Zeros always attacked at once, always used their altitude advantage swiftly before the Americans could react. But these Zeros were waiting. Then Thach understood. They were coordinating. 6 Zeros broke left. 6 broke right. 6 remained high. 3 groups, 3 separate axes of attack. They had seen the weave. They knew two Wildcats could protect each other from one direction, but from three directions simultaneously, that was a different problem entirely. The assault began at 8:17. 6 dove from above. 6 swept in from the left flank. 6 from the right. Thach called the weave, but his pilots faltered. Which threat do you counter when death comes from 3 sides? Lieutenant Bassett chose the high group, turning into them, but this exposed his right flank to the group coming from the right. Ensign Sheedy turned to cover Bassett, but in doing so, he broke his own weave with his wingmen. In moments, all 4 pairs were fragmented. 8 Wildcats were fighting alone. It was precisely what the Japanese wanted. Thach saw the collapse unfolding. He keyed his radio. Reform pairs. Lock onto your wingmen. Execute the standard weave. Ignore the other groups. His pilots heard him. Bassett wrenched his plane toward his wingman, found him, and locked in. They executed the weave even as Zeros swarmed from multiple directions. The high Zeros dove. Bassett turned toward his wingman. The Zeros followed, flying directly into his wingman's guns. 2 Zeros exploded. The others pulled up, stunned. The left group tried next, coming in at 14,000 feet. Thach and his wingmen executed their weave. 1 Zero committed, flew through the crossing pattern, and took 50 caliber rounds through the cockpit, falling away in a plume of smoke. The right group attacked Sheedy's pair. Same result. The weave held. Another Zero crashed. After 8 minutes, the Japanese had lost 5 Zeros. The Americans had lost 0 Wildcats. The coordinated 3-pronged attack had failed. The Zeros climbed away, but Thach understood a critical shift had just occurred. The Japanese had adapted. They had studied his weave and developed a countermeasure. The fact that their counter had failed was almost irrelevant. What mattered was that Japanese command was taking the weave seriously, serious enough to train their pilots specifically to defeat it. That evening, Thach filed his combat report. He detailed the 3-direction assault, described how the weave had held firm even under a coordinated attack, and recommended immediate, widespread adoption. No more testing, no more evaluation. The weave worked. Against standard tactics, it worked. Against adapted tactics, it worked. Period. The report reached Admiral Nimitz on June 25th. Nimitz forwarded it to Admiral King, Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Fleet. King read the kill ratios, studied the survival statistics. 0 American losses, 5 Japanese losses, 8 Wildcats versus 18 Zeros. On June 29th, Admiral King issued Fleet Order 41-1942. All fighter squadrons in the Pacific Fleet were to immediately adopt the Thach weave as standard combat doctrine. Mandatory training for all pilots, mandatory execution in all engagements. The matchstick idea was now official U.S. Navy tactics. But orders from Washington took time to filter to every squadron. Time was needed to train the pilots, to practice the pattern. And the Japanese were not waiting. On June 7th, over Guadalcanal, 32 Zeros would attack 12 Wildcats from 6 different squadrons. Some of those squadrons knew the weave, some of them didn't. And the ones that didn't would learn the hard way why Thach had been teaching with matches for 5 months.
July 7th, 1942, Guadalcanal. 12 Wildcats from 6 different squadrons flew combat air patrol over Henderson Field. 4 pilots had been trained in the Thach weave, 8 had not. At 11:20 a.m., 32 Zeros appeared from the north. The 4 pilots who knew the weave instantly paired up and executed the pattern. The 8 who did not fight independently, engaged in traditional 1-versus-1 dogfights. 22 minutes later, 6 Wildcats had been shot down. All 6 were pilots who had fought alone. The 4 pilots using the weave survived without a single scratch, claiming 7 Zero kills between them. Admiral Halsey read that combat report and issued orders immediately. Every fighter pilot in the South Pacific would learn the Thach weave within 2 weeks, no exceptions. Training programs commenced on July 10th. Thach himself flew to Guadalcanal, spending 3 weeks teaching the weave to every squadron on the island. Morning briefings, afternoon flight training, evening debriefs. He showed them the matches, drew the diagrams, and flew the demonstration patterns. Some pilots learned in 2 days, others needed a week, but every pilot learned. By August 1st, 96 Wildcat pilots could execute the weave. By September 1st, that number was 214. The tactic spread from the Pacific to the Atlantic, from carriers to land bases, and from Wildcats to other aircraft. P-38 Lightning squadrons began using it. P-40 Warhawk squadrons adopted it. Even some bomber formations adapted the crossing pattern for their own defense. The results were immediate and stunning. In June 1942, before the weave became doctrine, American fighters had a kill-to-loss ratio of 0.4 to 1 against Zeros. For every 10 American fighters lost, they shot down 4 Zeros. By October 1942, after the weave's widespread adoption, the ratio was 2.1 to 1. Americans were shooting down 2 Zeros for every Wildcat lost. Japanese pilots came to despise it. Radio intercepts from September contained warnings from Japanese squadron commanders. Do not commit to a tail chase. Do not follow American fighters into their wingmen's guns. Disengage if the Americans execute coordination tactics. But to disengage was to lose the fight, to allow American fighters to protect their bombers, to surrender air superiority. The Zero was still faster and more agile than the Wildcat, but that speed and agility were useless if you could not get a gun solution, and the weave made it nearly impossible to get one. By January 1943, the weave was standard doctrine across all U.S. fighter squadrons. The Army Air Forces adopted it. The Marine Corps adopted it. The British Royal Navy began training its carrier pilots in the method. The tactic born from 2 matches on a desk in San Diego had become the bedrock of Allied fighter doctrine. Thach was awarded the Navy Cross in February 1943. The citation read, "For extraordinary heroism and distinguished service in the development of fighter tactics that have saved numerous American lives and contributed significantly to the success of U.S. naval aviation operations." But Thatcher did not care about medals. He cared about the numbers. In the half-year preceding the war, the Pacific Fleet lost 137 Wildcats to Zeros. In the 6 months following its adoption as doctrine, that number fell to 41. 96 pilots returned home, all because 2 matches could cross paths. Fighter Command reassigned Thach to training duty in March of 1943, pulling him from combat and sending him back to San Diego to teach the weave to new aviators. He despised it. He hated being removed from the fight, but Command insisted he was more vital as an instructor than as a combat pilot. His value now lay in teaching the technique, not in employing it himself. For 18 months, Thach trained pilots. He taught the weave to over 800 naval aviators. Every one of them carried the tactic into combat. Every one of them survived encounters they should not have. And every one of them told other pilots about the commander who had saved their lives with a book of matches. The war concluded in August 1945. Thach was 40 years old. He had flown 73 combat missions, achieved 6 confirmed kills, and been awarded the Navy Cross, 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses, and 3 Air Medals. Yet none of that measured up to the one number that truly counted. Over 2,000 American pilots survived the war because they knew how to weave. With the peace, Thatcher faced a decision: remain in the Navy or return to civilian life. His wife longed for him to come home. His children hardly knew him. He had been away for 4 years. But staying in the Navy meant he could continue to teach, to continue saving lives. What does a man who saved 2,000 pilots with matchsticks do when the guns fall silent? John Thach stayed in the Navy. He could not abandon his calling to teach. He could not turn his back on pilots who needed to learn how to survive. He devoted the next 27 years to training fighter pilots, refining tactics, and saving lives without ever firing a shot. The Navy promoted him to commander in 1946, to captain in 1952, and to rear admiral in 1960. He commanded carrier groups during the Korean War, never flying in combat again, but every one of his pilots knew the weave. Korean War fighter pilots officially named it the Thach Weave. No other tactic in military history had ever borne a pilot's name while he was still living. In Vietnam, the weave evolved. F-4 Phantom pilots adapted it for supersonic speeds, dubbing it the Fluid 4 formation. The principle was identical, the same crossing pattern, just executed at vastly different velocities. Americans used it against North Vietnamese MiGs. The MiG-17 could outturn the F-4, just as the Zero had outturned the Wildcat. But the weave worked at 600 miles per hour, just as it had at 300.
Thach retired from the Navy in 1973, a four-star admiral with 40 years of service. He returned to San Diego, living a quiet life. He seldom spoke of the war, of Midway or Guadalcanal, or of the 2,000 pilots. When reporters asked about the weave, his answer was always the same. It wasn't genius, it was desperation. I just wanted my boys to come home. Fighter pilots never forgot him. Every year on February 10th, the anniversary of that first combat test, naval aviators from across the nation would call Thach. They thanked him and told him stories of how the weave had saved their lives, or their wingmen. Thach listened to every story and remembered every name. In 1981, the Navy named a building in his honor, Thach Hall, at Naval Air Station Pensacola, a fighter pilot training facility. Every naval aviator who earns their wings walks past a bronze plaque bearing Thach's likeness and three words: innovate, adapt, survive. John Thach died on April 15, 2001. He was 86 years old. His funeral at Arlington National Cemetery was attended by over 300 naval aviators. Many were in their 70s and 80s, men who had flown Wildcats in 1943, Phantoms in 1967, and Hornets in 1991. All of them were alive because one commander had once pondered a pack of matchsticks. Today, the Thach weave is still taught at every fighter pilot school in the United States military, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. Modern iterations have been adapted for stealth fighters and beyond visual range combat, but the core principle remains unchanged. Two aircraft protecting one another, turning toward one another, crossing paths, surviving together. The National Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola displays Thach's original pack of matches, preserved in a glass case beside a model F-4F Wildcat. The placard reads, Lieutenant Commander John Thach used these matches to develop the tactical innovation that saved over 2,000 American pilots during World War II. School groups file past that case daily. Most do not stop, but fighter pilots always do. They look at those matches, and they understand. If this story resonated with you, please do us a favor. Hitting that like button tells YouTube's algorithm to share this story with more viewers. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Each week, we rescue forgotten tales from dusty archives. Stories of pilots and commanders who saved lives with little more than matchsticks and raw courage. These are accounts of real people, real heroism. Leave a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from. Are you in Texas, Germany, Australia, or Japan? Our community spans the entire globe. You are not just a viewer, you are a vital part in keeping these memories alive. Share your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you are here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for ensuring John Thach does not fade into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you are helping make that happen.